this project actually started because of I think the work both of us do, trying to make some change in our society and around issues like the environment in Dave's case, time balance in my case, and always sort of being confronted with this question, what's that going to do to the economy? And you hear that enough and you start thinking, wow, what is this? Are we here to serve this thing called the economy? Is this our purpose on earth? Or is the economy here in some way to serve us? And so I started asking the question, what's the economy for anyway? It led to a series of speeches, which actually led me to me being invited to give this What's the Economy for Anyway talk to a group of PhD economists. Talk about nervous. This actually... Oh my God, I'm more nervous than I am in front of you. This was at the Rockefeller Estate in Tarrytown, New York. I thought they were going to run me out of the building and down into the Hudson River, and who knows what would happen then. But in fact, they actually liked it. They said, well, it's kind of superficial, and he doesn't know all that much about economics, but it's really kind of engaging. It would be fun for students. We need to get this guy some money so he can refine this thing. And so the University of Massachusetts Economics Department actually got some money from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund and hired me to sort of start this little project. What's the economy for anyway? It led to a class at the University of Washington, a summer school class that Lance Bennett, there, a wonderful professor at UW, got me started in doing, and then a class at the Evergreen State College afterwards. And there was still some money left over in the budget, and people said, well, you're a filmmaker. Why don't you make a film? And I thought, well, I can't afford to make a documentary, but I just seen this wonderful film. How many of you have seen The Story of Stuff? Some of you have seen that with this woman, Annie Leonard, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. You just have somebody talk, and you make it kind of funny, and it's sort of this comedy monologue, and it makes the point. And I knew Annie Leonard, so I called her up, and I said, hey, Annie, how would you like to be the host of this film? And she said, well, I'm kind of busy, but I don't think I really can do it. But you know who ought to do this for you? This guy, Dave Batker. And I knew Dave. We didn't know each other real well, but I knew him. This guy, Dave Batker, he's great. He's funny, and he's actually a real economist. In fact, he's In fact, he's like the only economist who ever worked for both the World Bank and Greenpeace. Yeah, I said, well, maybe I'll check this out. And so I got Dave, and he turned out to be great. I said, well, Dave, you're not as cute as Annie, but nonetheless, you work really well. And so Dave hosted the film, What's the Economy for Anyway? We're going to show you a little clip of that now, and then I'm going to come up and do my part of this and read a tiny bit from the book, and then Dave will do his part, and then we'll throw it open to you. We get questions, comments, tomatoes, whatever you want. The one thing you're not going to get is a PowerPoint, because we believe that power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely, so you don't have to worry about that tonight. Why don't we get started with a film and let's see where we go. Thank you.
The economy. It was issue number 1 in the last election, sending Barack Obama to the White House with a mandate to fix it. It dominates conversation. Bailouts, food prices, foreclosures, credit squeeze. We're all in it together. Hi, I'm Dave Batker. I'm just an ordinary American, like, Joe the plumber. But I'm also an economist. I've worked for the World Bank. Okay, I've also worked for Greenpeace. And I want to talk to you about this economy everybody's talking about. What's it for anyway? And is it working? Can it work better? You've probably heard about how some people measure economic success. Wall Street checks its stocks. Are they up or down? The government checks inflation, unemployment, housing starts, consumer confidence. But the king of all economic measures is the GDP. That's shorthand for the gross domestic product. The grosser it gets, the better we assume the economy to be. But what is the GDP anyway?
The GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced in a country in a given year.
GDP measures what we made here this year and paid for. If we pay, then GDP goes up, unless we're paying for stuff made somewhere else. We buy a lot of that, but it doesn't count, at least not for us. There are other things that don't count either, like volunteering in my community. It's a waste of time as far as the GDP is concerned. So is that daily walk I try to take, and the time I spend with my son. Unless I buy him stuff, that counts. But remember that big oil spill in Alaska? Made you want to cry, didn't it? But the GDP was laughing all the way to the bank. Because first, there was money spent to clean it up. Then those huge legal bills. The spill added more to the GDP than if the oil had made it safely to the refinery. Seriously. Maybe Bobby Kennedy said it best.
It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are American.
Once upon a time, our country had no idea how much stuff we made, and nobody cared. Until the Great Depression, when our government adopted national economic goals and needed a way of measuring their achievement. The economist Simon Kuznets laid out the GDP in 1934. During World War II, it was an important tool in measuring how many guns, tanks, and bombs we were building. Even then, Kuznets warned against making too much of his measure. But Kuznets is history, not the GDP though. With all the attention it gets, you'd think boosting the GDP is what the economy is for. That's what a lot of economists will tell you too.
The economy's purpose is to produce more and more goods and services that people...
Doesn't matter what they are, if money is spent on them, they must be goods. And the more of them, the better. What the consumer wants, the consumer gets. Economists call that consumer sovereignty. Buyer knows best. Case closed. Or is it? Actually, there's an American tradition that's older than GDP. About 100 years ago, Gifford Pinchot became the first director of the U.S. Forest Service. He wasn't a wild-eyed radical. He was a Republican. Pinchot believed that the purpose of the economy was the greatest good for the greatest number over the longest run. Think about it. Take the greatest good. What do you think that means?
The good life to me is having a job that's in your field that you're passionate about.
To me, family is very important.
And always having someone there to help you through hard times.
Having good health, nothing burning down financially, having everything stable.
It's all about quality of life, isn't it? Pursuit of happiness. Money's part of that. Stuff is part of that, but only part. Family, friends, health matter more. So how are we doing?
Okay, we can stop the film. Thank you.
Now we all know.
Now we all know. All right. So that just gives you a little flavor of the absurdity of the movie, which was absurd enough that a publisher was willing to pay to turn it into a book. And so that became What's the Economy For Anyway? And we do a lot of things in this book. We examine this whole question of GDP and then what this good life consists of and how we might make the economy if, in fact, we were interested in the greatest good for the greatest number over the longest run. And we make some comparisons to other countries and how they're doing certain kind of things. And one of the things we point out is that Duke University and Harvard University really recently did a survey of 4,000 Americans. And they gave them a choice of 3 hypothetical questions. See, I can't even count. I'm holding up 4 fingers and saying 3. That was strong wine. Who got the wine tonight? All right, 3 countries and hypothetical question asking them, where would you choose to live? In country A, where the top 20% of the population, you're thinking Occupy already, the top 20% of the population owns 20% of the wealth, or country B, where the top 20% of the population owns 35% of the wealth, or country C, where the top 20% of the population owns 80+% of the wealth, and asked 4,000 Americans what they thought. And so I'm going to ask you this. I want a show of hands, even though I won't be able to see any of them, but I want a show of hands from you. How many of you would choose to live in country A, where there's this sort of perfect equality? 20% owns 20% of the wealth. Raise your hand. I see one hand back there. You're the only one in the light. Are there any others? Maybe you need to yell aye. That many? Whoa, okay. Okay, welcome to North Korea. Now, country B, where the top 20% owns 35% of the wealth. How many of you would take country B? Yeah, okay. And country C, where the top 20% earns over 80% of the national wealth. Ooh, we are preaching to the choir tonight. I can tell that. Well, anyway, here's what actually happened. 82% of Americans chose country B, including 75% of those Americans who identified themselves as conservative Republicans. 10% of the country chose country A, that is North Korea or some place. There's actually no country in the world that has perfect equality like that. And only 8% of the population chose country C, including about 12% of those people who identified themselves as conservative Republicans. Well, there's an interesting thing. There is no country A, absolutely not even North Korea. There is a country B. That country is the most egalitarian country in the world. What is it called? It's called Sweden, that's right. Good. This is a smart audience. You don't even need to hear us. We should probably just start signing books now. But, and then what's country C? 2084. Oh, say that again. United. Yeah, well, no, they're even worse. The United States is country C. So, in other words, some 82% of Americans polled, of the 4,000 Americans polled by Harvard and Duke, chose Sweden over the United States. The book is a little edgy. We wanted it to be that. We wanted it to be accessible. Some of the critics call it breezy, but, goes by in a New York minute. You can read it really fast. You can put it on your Kindle, do it, whatever you want. Anyway, here's the deal. I'm going to read just a little bit from the introduction and then a couple of short things from a couple of the chapters to give you a little flavor of the book, because this, after all, is a book reading. This is from the introduction. As we write this introduction on May 22nd, 2011, the end of the world, predicted for yesterday by evangelist Harold Camping, has been unexpectedly delayed. Darn, don't you hate it when that happens? Its coming was headlined in newspapers and trumpeted by millions of dollars in advertising, including full-page ads in USA Today and thousands of scary billboards. Mr. Camping has now offered a new date for the apocalypse, October 21st, 2011. Around the date of the publication of this book. So if you're reading it, it probably didn't happen. And if it did, please don't blame our publisher. Of course, most people consider Harold Camping crazy. including us. Few expected his predicted rapture to actually occur. Most of us believe in facts and evidence, and yet with regards to our economy, myths still abound. For some of our political leaders, the solution to the crisis that hit us in 2008 is to do more of what caused it, only faster. Privatize more, deregulate more, cut the taxes more, et cetera, et cetera. That those leaders can still push these myths and be taken seriously means that a real understanding of how our economy works, what we want from it, and how we might reach those goals remains to be won. We hope to contribute a little bit to that ultimate victory. So that's basically gives you, I think, a flavor of what we're trying to do in this book. And I'm going to read for a little bit from Chapter 4, the chapter on health, unhealthy at any cost. Stephen Bezrushka, and I don't think Stephen's here tonight, but probably a number of you in this room know Stephen. He's a wonderful professor at the University of Washington. Stephen Bezrushka calls it America's best-kept secret. We die younger than people in other rich countries, says Bezrushka, a craggy and fit mountain climber who also serves as an emergency room physician and a professor at the University of Washington School of Public Health. Thomas Jefferson, I'm quoting now, Thomas Jefferson may have said that we have a right to life, but we don't have a right to a very long one. After World War II, we're the healthiest people in the world. Now, we're not even close. So it's no wonder that healthcare, which after all is supposed to make us healthy, was in 2009 and early 2010 consistently front page above the fold in our papers and at the top of our political agenda. From the reports of angry seniors demanding that government keep its hands off their Medicare, and fears of fictional death panels, to the people carrying weapons to town hall meetings, healthcare was headline news. Stories of underinsured families bankrupted by an operation or a hospital aspirin fed the sense that our medical system was dysfunctional. And though our former president, many Republican members of Congress, and the CEOs of American insurance companies still claim that the United States has the greatest healthcare system in the world, most Americans are a bit suspicious. They have a right to be. First, there was that World Health Organization study done in 2000 that ranked the United States 37th in the quality of its health care. Many experts think it's slipped a little further down the list in the last decade, but lots of Americans don't trust the World Health Organization. Some argue that the WHO is part of the United Nations, which favors socialism, so it probably cooked the numbers. Never mind that the WHO commissioned American doctors to do the study. You really can't trust anyone these days. But let's leave the possibly pinko WHO alone for a moment. What do other experts say? The quality of healthcare models is a subjective thing, but what about objective health data? Well, for starters, the Central Intelligence Agency's World Factbook ranks the United States 49th in life expectancy. Simply put, that means that people in 48 other countries live longer on average than Americans do. We're talking about the CIA here, not the WHO. We're 49th, just above Albania. Okay, we pay the most and we get the worst results. Why are we putting up with that? We go a little bit into how much we do spend, which is an awful lot of money. And then we take on some other subjects, including the insecurity we face in our society, the inequality. But one of the things I talk about a lot is the time squeeze and time stress. I have been the executive director for some time of an organization called Take Back Your Time. This is a kind of a strange thing because I have none. And I also started a new organization called AHA, A-H-A. It stands for American Hypocrites Association. However, I talk a lot about this time issue, and it is an issue here in the United States. I happen to be the author of a bill. I wrote a bill that Congressman Alan Grayson of Florida introduced into Congress in 2009 called the Paid Vacation Act of 2009. It would have given Americans a little vacation time. So I'm going to read just a little bit from this Chapter 6, The Time Squeeze, say a few more words, and then turn this over to my better half. Consider the headline for a full-page story in the New York Times on July 31st, 1910. More than 100 years ago, how long should a man's vacation be? President Taft says everyone should have 3 months. Love you, President Taft. Raise him up. I hope he's hearing this. We're not making this up. 3 months, President Taft, a conservative Republican president best known for his appetite. 2 to 3 months vacation, Taft was quoted as saying, quote, are necessary in order to enable one to continue his work in the next year with that energy and effectiveness that it ought to have. He suggested that men and women alike should have a change of air where they can expand their lungs and get exercise in the open. The article contained a subhead. What big employers of labor and men of affairs, and we can suspect that they had many affairs, men of affairs think on this subject. Leading industrialists and bankers of the day were asked their opinions regarding Taft's suggestion. Some actually thought it was a good idea. Not surprisingly, others thought it was crazy, but conceded that a month off wouldn't be such a bad idea. That was a century ago, when our economy was 1/10 as productive as it is today. But woe awaits any modern American politician who advocates a month off each year, as all Europeans get, much less 3. At least that's what politicians think. Polls actually show fairly strong support for a paid vacation act in the United States, though most people think 2 to 3 weeks would be about right. But we introduced that. Alan Grayson introduced the bill. It called for 1 to 2 weeks of guaranteed vacation time for all Americans. Let me tell you that there are only 5, count them 5, one hand, countries in the entire world that do not require any paid vacation time for employees. Those countries are? No, North Korea does. China does. Burma is right. That paragon of human rights, Burma, is one of the 5. What's one of the other 5? You know that. You live in it. United States. Okay, the United States, Burma, Nepal, Suriname, and Guyana. How many of you know where Suriname and Guyana are? They're on the northeast coast of South America. That's it. That's our competition. So we introduced a bill. We thought it was pretty modest, 1 to 2 week vacation. Congressman Grayson, called the congressman from Disney because he represents Orlando, put it into Congress. And you would have thought that we were asking for the end of Western civilization as we know it, given the response. The conservative blogosphere lit up. People were saying, oh my God, these people, these slackers, they're trying to turn America into a 21st century France. France, can you imagine? As if we were all going to be forced to appreciate good food and wine. Well, as you might imagine, this bill did not pass. On the other hand, here's a little bit about what happens in some other countries, and this is the case of the Netherlands. In 2000, the Dutch Parliament passed the Working Hours Adjustment Act, perhaps the most important piece of time-balanced legislation ever approved anywhere. The law requires that employers allow workers to cut their hours to part-time. Employers can refuse this only if they can demonstrate that such a reduction would cause financial hardship for the firm, something that happens in less than 5% of cases. Employees keep their jobs, opportunities for promotion, hourly pay, and in any case, European law requires that part-time workers be paid the same hourly work rate as full-timers doing the same work. They keep their health care and prorated benefits such as sick leave, pensions, and vacation time. Employees are also allowed to increase working hours, though few choose this option. The law means a lot to working parents who wish to reduce the combined stresses of working and caring for children. Anne-Marie Widener, a health researcher and part-time instructor at Georgetown University, bubbles with enthusiasm as she discusses the Dutch devotion to time balance she witnessed while earning her PhD at Leiden University. Her dissertation compares life satisfaction among Dutch and American parents. Not surprisingly, she says, my polling showed that in almost every area of life, Dutch parents were substantially more satisfied than their American counterparts. And so are their children. A 2007 UNICEF study ranked children's welfare in the Netherlands as the highest in the world. The United States, by contrast, was 20th of 21 wealthy countries surveyed. We talk about a lot of these kind of ideas from other countries, and we look at many, many different countries as we explore the kind of ideas that we could learn from and we could apply in this country. So let me just bring this to a close by talking about an event that's coming up. It's actually the centennial of a very famous event in American history. On January 11th, 1912, thousands of poor women speaking a babble of 25 immigrant languages left the textile mills of Lawrence, Massachusetts, to march in its icy streets, demanding an increase in pay of 2 cents an hour, from 16 to 18 cents, and a decrease in their work hours of 2 per week, from 56 to 54. The legend has it that these women carried in front of them banners which read, "We want bread and roses too." Bread signified higher wages, money, stuff, and roses, shorter hours, time to smell the roses, time for art, for love, for the beauty their drudging spirits never knew, as the old labor song put it. And bread and roses were the twin demands of the labor movement until after World War II, when the roses were left to wilt. And all the focus became on this thing called the GDP, the money, the stuff, the consumption, what we could get. I think it's time that we become gardeners of the roses, that we water the roses, that we understand that there is more to life than just money and stuff and GDP, that health and family and connection and community and all of those things, art and such, matter so much for us in terms of the good life. And I'm involved in a project now that's really about that. It's about getting us to think about a different way of measuring our success as a society than the GDP. That project is called the Happiness Initiative. I'm working with a wonderful team. Some of the folks from that group are here now. You can find out more about us at happycounts.org. We in Seattle are the base of the national organization. We actually just delivered a happiness report card for the city of Seattle. We're working we have interest now from probably nearly about 24 cities and about 100 campuses in this project. You can go online and take a survey. It takes you about 12 to 15 minutes. It'll give you a sense of how well you're doing in 10 key areas of life, not just the material side. We think that this kind of project, and this project in particular, gives us a way as a country to start asking the questions that count, to start thinking about what the economy is for, and to start measuring how well we're doing, where we're flourishing, where we're hurting in the whole realm of life that matters to our happiness and to our well-being. This is not some pinko plot. This is Thomas Jefferson, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson said that the sole purpose of government is increasing the happiness of the citizens assembled beneath it. So I think that's our task, to water the roses, to bring happiness back to our country, to understand that the purpose of the economy is the greatest good, a high quality of life, for the greatest number in a just society, not a 1% take all society, and in a sustainable society where we can pass on the bounty and the wonder and the gifts that we have been offered to our children and to theirs in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And you can see, John is just fantastic. He was a joy to work with on the film and the book. The book was really, his idea, this amazing question, what's the economy for anyway? And I think just that title has struck such a chord not just with Americans, but we gave a talk in Europe not too long ago, but really globally. And if you think about where we are today, I mean, it's really a remarkable time. In fact, in our history, think about it. On this earth, we've never had so many people before. We've never had so much technology, so much knowledge, science, education. In fact, we've never had this much wealth before, if you just take the last 5-10 years. So we're at a sort of an apex of human history. And yet we're challenged by some brand new and significant challenges. There's climate change, running out of oil, the wealth distribution becoming skewed not just in the US but many other countries. Got challenges with currency crises, etc. in Europe. And many of these crises, whether it's oil or climate change, etc., have to do, I would call, kind of a sustainability paradox. How do we fit the economy inside the globe? And this is probably the challenge of our time. And then the core of economics really is about how do you take the resources that we have and allocate them well for your desired outcomes. And is our desired outcome in the US really to have a lot more stuff? That was our desired outcome in the 1930s. That's why we got the GDP. But if you think about it, it's time to reflect. At that time, we had dirt tracks in this country for roads. We didn't have indoor plumbing. There really wasn't enough stuff. There wasn't a chicken in every pot. And now we're a different nation. We're in fact a different world. We've been able to solve a lot of those problems quite well. We're not short of plastic toys and asphalt anymore. We're short of salmon. We're short of time. We're short of maybe enjoyment with our family and friends. And so now it's time to think about some of these questions. And as we kind of think about this paradox and where we are, we've kind of got, I'd say, a new economic vision out there. And it's global. And it kind of goes like this. You need to work a lot harder for a lot less and fewer benefits, forget retirement, and suck in those toxics because it's bad news to try and regulate industry. They need the business. And, this is the sort of vision that we've been proceeding with. It's not progress, it's planned regress. And this is our competition for an economic vision of the greatest good for the greatest number over the longest run. An economy that's actually sustainable. An economy that can, as no other economy in probably human history practically, except maybe hunter-gatherers, provide greater free time for people. Greater ability to be with your community, with your children. It's amazing what we have to work with. And yet what we're presented with is, get busy and consume more. Build up more debt because the economy needs it. You're working for the economy. It's not working for you. So I think that's why we wrote this book. And I would have to say, as an economist, it was such a delight with John Graaf because no economist even conceives of a book like this. In truth, nobody would take on this many issues in a sort of a systems approach. And I think that's a piece of this book which is really important. We talk about health, but it's linked to food. If we give giant subsidies to corn, we're subsidizing sugar and fat in our diet. We're making that the cheapest food in this nation. And there's no way to solve our health crisis if you make fat and sugar the cheapest things in town to eat. In fact, just like cigarettes, we kind of ought to be taxing those things. And we ought to move maybe $20 billion of subsidies from corn to maybe good food. Make good food more available. Exactly. And so one of the great compliments that we've had in the book is that there are solutions in every chapter. And not only that, these chapters are pulled together in a systems approach. So you think about it, in the 1930s was really a transformation. There was only microeconomics until in the 1930s. Microeconomics is the study of the household, markets, firms, that picture of our economy, very important to advance. There was no GDP, it didn't exist. There was no measure of employment, no measure of inflation, no measure of the money supply. We didn't even know how much money we put out in the economy. These are national scale measures. The Depression confronted people with brand new problems, national scale problems. And so we had a national scale economics. And incredibly, one of the big arguments, well, 90% of the economics profession at the time said, it's a cycle. It's just a cycle. It's going to come back around. We don't have to do anything. And, that sounds kind of familiar with climate change, if you might remember. And there was a new group of economists that said, no, we need a model of the national economy. We need new goals, new measures, new policies, new institutions. And we got GDP, unemployment, inflation for measures for a new set of goals. Those goals were produce more, have less unemployment, have retirement, a national system for retirement, etc. And we got new policies and new institutions to implement it. Now, economies don't just sort of grow, they transform. So it's like a larva tuna into a full-grown tuna, and those are very different things. And today, we are in a new place. The old goals are not really our goals anymore, and that's why this question is so important. People, when you interview Americans, actually more money isn't on the top of their agenda. It's, I want more time with my family and friends. We've gone from our nation, life, liberty, and the pursuit of, forget it, instead of happiness. And so when we think about it, also, this suite of problems that we've got are not like the Black Plague, where people didn't know what was killing them, and so people put a pocket full of posies in their pocket because good smells kept the plague away. In fact, we understand these problems. We understand the whole suite. It's amazing the number of solutions that we have, from energy to giving time to people to ensuring that children. The U.S. is also one of the 4 countries in the world, 4 countries only, that doesn't require maternity leave. Crazy. Isabel, my wife, came from the Philippines. She said when our first child was born, she was supposed to take sick leave. She said, childbirth is not sickness. It should be maternity leave. Canada, you get a year. What's that tied to? Healthier children. Children who do better at school. Greater health, less crime. Just goes on and on. These pieces are all fit together in a systems approach. And that's the way our book looks at it as well. And so I think when you think about it, we do have to come back to what our values are. And I'd like to give just a tiny survey. Just think about it. What's the most important thing to you? And we've done this for chambers of commerce and all kinds of folks. And economists like to take 2 baskets and see which one weighs more to people. So I'll give you your choice. Would you rather have all your stuff, and we'll just throw all Bill Gates' stuff in with it too, $40 billion. You can have that in one big pile. Or you can have one service of nature and good. The ecosystem service is photosynthesis on the planet. Source of food, source of all our oxygen. The good is breathable air, oxygen. What would you rather have? Of course, I can't see well, but how many people would rather have oxygen? Say aye. Aye. How many people would rather have Bill Gates' stuff? 40 billion. 40 billion. Yeah. Okay, come on up here. You can if you hold your breath for 5 minutes without passing out, I'll give you $500. Your own brain will turn off with that decision. So, but how about another survey? Would you rather have, say, all Bill Gates' stuff and a brain and a heart that don't function, your health, or a brain and a heart that function? How many would have health? Say aye. How many would rather have the 40 billion and no brain and heart that function? No takers. That's an interesting value. How about friends and family? Would you rather have 40 billion and no friends, no family, or 40 billion, or no 40 billion, and friends and family? I've got a few like that too. How many would take friends and family? Say aye. How many of the 40 billion? Okay, there's one. Maybe we need to see a psychologist there. But the point is that what's interesting is our economic measures are focused on that built capital, producing more stuff. And yet when we come right down to our values, we want more time with our family. We want natural systems that still function. We want healthy communities, and we want good health as well. If your economy is driving you to work some people to work 60 hours a week, there's no way they are going to have more time for family and friends. That is a trade-off. It's an opportunity cost. And we have to come to grips with this reality. And so when we think about the economy and a systems approach and our values, it means, in fact, in the 21st century, we do have to build a new economy. It has to be more sustainable. It has to be based with greater health benefits. It probably needs less stuff, in fact, for the US, not for Ethiopia. Maybe we need more stuff in Ethiopia, undoubtedly. And so we need to think about what policies can bring this about. Can economies transform that fast? Well, amazingly, yes. Economies, that's what they do. They transform. You look at the US between 1934 and 1944, it was a totally remade nation. Everything from agriculture to, we got folks back there, but anyway, everything from manufacturing policy, agriculture, health, everything else. Tremendous change, both built on new macroeconomics, World War II, etc. China transformed between 1980 and 1990, just an unbelievable set of changes. Europe between 1950 and 1960, economy completely rebuilt. And it can go on and on. The point is there, what transformed those economies? We made new decisions about investment. And that's why another piece of the book looks at the financial crisis and such. John Maynard Keynes made a nice differentiation between investment, where somebody goes out and you lay your money down as an entrepreneur or whatever, and you try to produce a good or service. Maybe it's a pharmaceutical that only has 1 in 1,000 or 10,000 chance, but at least investment means you could produce a good or service. Speculation, on the other hand, is where you cannot produce a good or service, but you might skim some value off of other people. And there are a lot of good examples of that. For instance, currency trading, right now, $3 trillion a day are invested in currency trading. It can't produce a good or a service, actually, but it can skim a little bit of value off of, Philippine pesos or US dollars or euros. And so that's just really focused on redistribution of wealth and not a good redistribution. Well, there are very simple policies which can actually eliminate a huge amount of speculation. Just a financial transactions tax and a currency tax that's very minute. If you travel to Europe and want to exchange dollars for euros, you're not going to notice much. But if you're making a transaction of 50,000 trades in a minute, yeah, you're going to pay. And so it crowds, part of macroeconomics was figuring out how to crowd speculation, eliminate tax and squash speculation, crowd it into real investment, because then you produce renewable energy, etc. And that's a big task we have, and we have a lot of ideas about that here in the book. So when you think about these things, we also need to create what I would call a science-based economics. As John alluded to, there's much in the economics, sadly, where we've already learned the lessons. The information is abundant. Have mothers and fathers have more time with their infant children, and the whole economy does better. Education is better, health, crime, etc. Don't give them time, ADHD is greater. All these other symptoms and impacts are greater. So we need to take that systems approach. And I'd like to say another piece of the book, which, just in responding, I'll give just some quick kind of policy solutions. Are these things really possible? Well, it's astounding how one thing that I love about our nation, America, is that it's built on a pragmatism. If you show greater success, often you can gather people together that you wouldn't expect to come together. And that's one piece. And the second piece is America has had its greatest periods of progress when progressives unite across their silos and campaign issues. If you think about the period 1900 to 1920 was a remarkable period. 4 huge constitutional amendments. There was this move to get rid of the power brokers in cities and corruption. We had a constitutional amendment to get rid of the Senate being appointed by party bosses, more or less, and have them directly elected. Big deal. Women got the vote. The income tax was approved, and of course the prohibition. Those things actually came together because the clean government campaigner men said, there's no way we're going to beat this, a lot of these corrupt governments unless we get a lot more clean voters, and that means women. And so you had this merging of these progressive movements. We had 900 constitutional amendments to state constitutions from 1910 to 1920. Incredible, the initiative process, the referendum, you can just go on and on and on. And it's because progressive voters finally decided, this is my issue as a farmer, income tax, because farmers wanted not to have just property taxes, but they united, and that's when we got real progress. Same thing happened during the Depression and the New Deal. Farmers went, well, I don't really understand all this SEC and banking reform, but I support it, and I'm going to support it. And those pieces were so crucial, and FDR, in one of his greatest speeches, said the New Deal is a whole. You can't just have a little piece here and a little piece there. It fits together, and that was true. And that's what we face now, is looking at a broad change within the economy, and I think it's very much possible. Just a local example, here in King County, a couple examples where we need to change things pretty fundamentally, and they're moving forward. Black Diamond to Seattle. We worked, Earth Economics, our little nonprofit, on, hey, how do we get these cities to invest in natural capital? We have a whole system for funding roads, cities, counties, state, federal government. We don't have that for natural capital. And yet natural capital, from forests to wetlands to marine systems, provide flood control, biodiversity, drinking water, huge amount of benefits. Puget Sound provides over $1 trillion of benefits from our natural systems. Yet we have no funding mechanism for natural systems which is dependable. So we proposed this Watershed Investment District. It's in the book. And amazingly, Republicans, Democrats, practically the Tea Party crowd, and the Seattle progressives all support it. Why? Because instead of saying we're going to have 19 stormwater districts and all put pipes into the river, and then a flood district that goes, gee, we're having more higher water all the time, you could kind of look at both your natural and built capital for salmon restoration, flood protection, stormwater, and drinking water as a whole, and you're going to actually produce more for less cost, etc. And that pragmatism brought unanimous support. Hopefully we'll have a bill before the House and Senate very soon. Green jobs. There are a huge number of examples that I could give. Another case is thinking about how we treat time in economic decision making. It was not always our habit to discount the future, to treat the future as if it is valued at less. But in fact, all our cost-benefit analysis does that, our rates of return calculations, etc. And I think that was a 20th century view. Now we need to change it. Seattle as a utility, Seattle Public Utilities, Seattle was once declared the most unhealthy city in the United States in 1898. That's because we had cholera, typhoid, and you really did stand a chance of dying if you drank the water in Seattle, because the water was pulled out of Lake Washington. Well, then there was this vision of we're going to buy the Cedar River watershed, and the forest is going to filter our water. Since then, we have not had to build 4 $200 million filtration plants. The forest has done it for free. This is a hugely economically valuable system. And yet on the balance sheet for Seattle Public Utilities, the forested area only counts for timber value and bare land value. If you want to build a filtration plant, you can borrow $200 million. It shows up on the balance sheet, and you can increase your rates because it shows up on your balance sheet. If you want to remove roads and improve the watershed, sorry, that's a write-down. And so we need to change accounting rules. And we've got San Francisco, New York, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, Vancouver, BC, all moving to change national accounting standards to include these benefits of drinking water. And that means that you could have a funding mechanism for restoration and for natural systems. So this kind of systems thinking, I think, can really move forward. And in fact, it is. So I want you to think about, when you think about what's the economy for anyway, this is, as an economist, this is so dramatically different from even what our critical economists are proposing. For instance, Joseph Stiglitz. We sat in a meeting with Joe Stiglitz, and even though he criticizes the GDP heavily, he still wants economic growth to be, more or less that is what's held out as the sun that we must follow. And thinking more fundamentally about the economy, I think we're coming around. This book, we were ranked the top business and economics book by Publishers Weekly, a very big deal, because these questions were brought up and the series of solutions. So when you take, I hope you'll consider buying the book. I'll give my shameless pitch. But before I do that, I wanted to say that change in America has always come in two forms. One form is individuals deciding to buy things and take action in their own life differently and to really build a new economy that way. That's critically important. But women never got the vote that way. We never got the income tax that way, etc. That took collective action. And there's no doubt we need a constitutional amendment to stop corporations from contributing to campaigns and having personhood. And that we also tie together in the book. We feel that single issue is the one that it brings in the McCain Republicans and others, and that can help us build the progressive movement to really get the snowball effect on a lot of other policies. So when we think about it, that these things are group efforts. And I wanted to just take a brief moment, I guess when the lights come on, to recognize the folks from the Happiness Initiative and Earth Economics, my organization, that really contributed and made this book possible as well, because it was a group effort. But I think I'll just tie up with having you think about this. 100 years ago, Americans, as John mentioned, Americans campaigned to have 18 cents an hour. We had children, like my children, 6 and 12 years old, filleting fish for 8 hours a day, working in coal mines. This is what our nation was made up of. Why were those things changed? Because we had a huge movement of the American populace, and that pushed our politicians forward to change policy in a huge number of areas. We have to have that again. And it really takes, I think, laying out how structurally we can do that, and then all of us participating in our own lives on both pieces, individually and collectively, to move constitutional amendments and other big pieces forward. So it's all of us who are going to build a 21st century economy, and we can really do it, and we can actually implement this. I'm very convinced that when we have a vision of regression, which people are not happy with. One of the things I sometimes do is after I say, you got to have lower wages and forget retirement, etc., then we flash up, how's this going over? Well, it didn't go over well in Tunisia or Spain or in the US or basically anywhere else. And so it's time for a better paradigm, and our time is really now, and we can build it together. So thank you very much, and I guess we can open it up to questions.
So I'm hearing a lot of ideas that are a little bit like throwing the kitchen sink in there. There's so many things about the environment, about vacation, about maternity leave, all these different things, which are a lot of us here are sympathetic about it. What I'm yearning for, I think, in this is some overarching way to capture that I think would be able to sell it a little bit better. So you mentioned Bhutan, and of course they have their gross happiness index, I believe it was, which is one form of it. And I'm thinking of, I think his name is Max Neef, the Chilean economist, who, if I'm not mistaken, proposed, instead of measuring money, to measure meeting people's needs broadly. And what he, I believe, meant by that was not just needs for like food and shelter, but needs at the other end of the scale, like for meaning and purpose. And so I'm wondering how you're capturing that in terms of actually, quantifying this and trying to measure, not just like, individual propositions for this and that and the other thing, but actually an overarching, okay, so how do we then measure how we're doing once we put some of these things in place?
Well, Julie,
Thank you for that question.
basically that's what
Good
our
one to
book is
end on.
about. It's about building that kind of structure and showing how all these things fit together. If you want Max Neef's fundamental human needs list, it's on page 45. There's a whole layout of what Max Neef has to say. Maslow, another one, idea of basing this thinking on human needs. In fact, our book follows that structure. It sort of follows Maslow and Max Neef's idea of needs as we build our arguments. But I do believe that things like the Happiness Initiative allow us a way of measuring how well we're doing. They take what science has shown, and there's a lot of great science about well-being out there today. Some 30,000 articles in the last year published about happiness, for example. They look at what does make for well-being, what makes us happy. And when you look at those things, you can begin to measure them. And that's why I'm so active and so excited about the Happiness Initiative, because it is a way of measuring those things and getting us to think in a holistic way. And I know Dave will have something to add to that as well, but that was a great question.
It was. And that's exactly right. The framework presented is, just as we had this huge transformation of the economy from really an 19th century economy to a 20th century economy by adopting new goals, new measures, new policies, new institutions, and actually new funding mechanisms. That is what we need to do today. And that's why and it actually does hold together as a full framework. And to make it more understandable to, I'd say, common people as well as a solid format, it's like looking at the greatest good for the greatest number over the longest run, and you have a suite of policies which are not just targeted toward one thing, like we're going to have a rural electrification, we put up wires, but you look at the health benefits, the energy implications, the carbon implications and such. And I wanted to mention this. I was invited to Bhutan in 2011 to help advance the happiness measure. It's shockingly sophisticated. They're interested in our work on ecosystem services, and one of the 9 realms, the natural environment. But each of these realms are very impressive, and the same with Max Neef, it's why we bring that up also, is that these kind of measures are getting to a new set of goals of looking at family, of looking at our time-work balance and a variety of things. And I think that this book really presents the question out there and ways to look at it. And if there were a step forward, it is just as microeconomics was kind of all the economics that was out there, for the U.S. at one time. And then we got a new scale, a national scale economics. That's why we named ourselves Earth Economics, is that really macroeconomics as a whole now has problems. And it's the economics that's used both by communist countries like China and capitalist countries, communist, capitalist China and the U.S. and such. And we need some pretty fundamental change. And this book doesn't give everything, but I think it's pretty much lays the case out of how to move forward with a new framework. So
thank you for your patience. You've been a wonderful audience.
There's a saying in French, if you don't do politics, politics will be done to you. They will do it to you. What do capitalists want? What do people in power want? From time immemorial. And that is one thing. Everything. That's what they want. Everything. And they're not going to concede anything to the citizens of this country unless we demand it. There is no historical instance of any American president waking up one morning and saying, I think segregation is immoral and very bad and is deeply reprehensible to America's professed values. Or I think dropping napalm on Vietnamese and using Agent Orange is deplorable. We should stop that. It's only because of heat from the streets that anything has ever shifted in this political culture.